Yeah, another one of those really basic apps, right? We've got 3 buttons and a little link there. So the topic of today's workshop is event listeners and handlers. We're specifically going to look at that in the context of a React application, and we also need to cover some Dom Selector methods that we have. So methods to actually select certain items inside of our web page, so that we can attach these event handlers onto them, or event listeners onto them, and write the event handler functions. Alright, coming back over into an application. So the markup is really simple, right? All we've got is our markup for our 3 buttons and our link down here. So I think it's probably best to start with some Dom selectors. And I might as well just open a new file for this, just so I can type stuff on the screen, and then we'll implement it into the app in a second. Cool, so coming back to the app, let's say I wanted to select this button here. What would be a way that I could select that out of the page to return that element from a method? Does anyone know? Has anyone heard of the get element by set of methods?
Get element by ID.
So we've got ID, and that is attached to the document object, yeah? So it's document.getElementById. What other ones have we got? Not get element by ID, but we could get something else. There is one by name, but it's not get element by name, it's get elements by name, which is a bit confusing. But I suppose ID, you've got to just think ID as a unique selector, whereas all of these other selectors are not unique. So as well as name, we have class name. Is it class name or class? Because now I'm getting confused with React. I think it's class name, but I'll double check in a second. There's also get elements by something else name. Tag name, yeah, so a tag would be just any plain tag like that. A class name would have the syntax, well, in React. Let's do them all for the H1, for example. So the H1 in React is going to have class name equals, let's say if we're working on, do button 3 for that one. And get elements by name, what does that mean then? No, that literally means we have an attribute called name equal to whatever name we want to call it. Say button 1 for now. And the ID means we need some sort of element which has an ID equal to, so what, I'll swap these around. Button 1. Yeah, so get element by ID would work on elements that have an ID property. Get elements by name would work on elements that have a name property. Get elements by class name, they need a class name, or if we're just talking about normal HTML, of course, that is just class. This is our JSX markup. Then get elements by tag name will literally just find all the elements with a certain tag name there. So they are the older DOM query methods or DOM selector methods. There are 2 more which were added a bit more recently. Anyone know what these ones are? Was that Max said query selector? Yeah, correct, Max. Yep, definitely. So we've got the query selector method. And there's also one very similar to query selector, and that is query selector all. So if I wanted to query by ID, what would I pass by the ID button 1? What would I pass into the query selector method?
I'm not sure, but
Not sure? So it definitely takes a string,
with,
and then the CSS.
hashtag button 1.
Yeah, the CSS format for ID is the hash, isn't it? So we just do hash button 1 like that. If I wanted to do elements by name, can it do elements by name? I'm not sure, to be honest. Can definitely do by class name. If I wanted to select a class name, dot, exactly. Yeah, so this is very similar to the testing syntax that we've got on the platform. Yeah, when you're selecting those React elements, you're looking at the test case and it says dot find, and inside it's finding either a hash, a dot, or if it was just plain, so if it was just a plain tag, such as the h1 tag, you can just literally put in h1 like that, yeah? But you'll see this probably most commonly used with IDs or class names. Query selector all, you might see that more commonly used with actual elements, because query selector will only be able to select one element, yeah? So this would return the actual element. Maybe I should put the first matching element. So let's say that was dot button 1, for example. And query selector all will return a node list. Think of this as like an array, but it's not a JavaScript array, it's an array-like object, which means we can easily turn it into a JavaScript array using the spread operator. Yeah, so we could do dot 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 node list inside of a JavaScript array, and that would give us an array containing all the elements that we've managed to find when we select. So if I perhaps had a class name of button in there, that's going to return a node list of all the buttons inside of my HTML page. Then I might want to add event listeners to every single button, or I might want to style every single button in a certain way. Yeah, and that would be a way that I could do that. I could loop over the node list as an array, or use a HTML for loop if I didn't even want to use JavaScript, and apply that style to all of the buttons that I have queried. These things work similar ways. So get element by ID will return the matching element, and of course it can only be one because we're using an ID. Returns the only matching element. And these get elements by name, sorry about that thing, keeps flashing up, get elements by class name, get elements by tag name, they all, I think, return a HTML list, which, yeah, it's a bit confusing, but again, just think of it another array-like object. So this will return an array-like object. So the thing to note about these ones that return array-like objects, we can't directly assign event listeners to them, yeah, because they're more than one thing. They're a list, they're an array. So we need to do that extra step of either selecting part of the array or looping over the array. Alright. Of course, these are all methods, so you would invoke them. So get elements by name. You would pass in the actual name as a string again. Just the same way as you're passing in whatever you want to select here as a string. So they're all your Dom Selector methods. And then we typically have 3 ways of creating event listeners as well. The way that you'll see in React is the inline style way, which looks like an old inline style way of assigning an event listener, but under the hood it's very similar to doing document.add event listener. So this was the standard HTML way, yeah? Assigned onto the document module of every HTML page is this add event listener method. And the first option is what event you want to assign. So do you want to listen for key presses, key downs, loading event that the browser triggers, all the mouse events there, video events. Common one will be the click event, the form event there, submit, toggle event. There's lots, right? There's a huge number of events that we can listen for through the document.add event listener. And most of these are supported in React. Maybe they all are now, but certainly most of them are. But it's good to be aware of this method as well if React doesn't support a certain listener that you want to use. So you would just literally put, we could listen for a submit event, for example, and the second argument in the event listener would be the name of the function. So for example, just handle submit. So that handle submit event will be defined somewhere else in your document. Other ways, if you've actually selected an element, you could actually assign the property on click and set that equal to your function. Something like that. So if you'd selected an element through this document.getElement by ID, and you've got the element that has an ID of first button, I don't know what it's called, yeah. Because this is getElement by ID, we don't need the hash, yeah, because it's only searching for ID, so just the name of the ID must go in there. And then you assign an on-click event to it that invokes the function when the on-click event is triggered. Whew, yeah, so lots of options, but just be aware of these methods when we jump back into the app now and we show you how to add some event listeners in a React application. It is with a lowercase, yeah. So in HTML, and this is what we're using, yeah, we're just using the document of the HTML page, then it's a lowercase event, and I'm not sure whether it was bringing them up for me, no, but if I did it, I think this way, you know, when we got all those events listed for us, how did I do it now? Yeah, so notice all of those, they're all lowercase, yeah, even this really long one, on compass needs calibration. I've never used that in my life, but obviously it exists. Then there's no capitalization there for HTML events. Only when it comes to React, everything is camel case, yeah. Say again?
I have a quick question, Ray.
Yeah, go on, Cam.
When I've done so far, when I've been learning, it usually says, so like for example, in line you do the button equals curly braces on click. Is it better to do it like in a separate file like this, do you find?
No, not necessarily. I mean, this was just me writing some notes really so that we had all the building blocks we need now to go and write the styles. And you'll see that most of the time in React I'm going to use the inline style method because it's just the way it's done in React, right? We're not separating out our concerns as much. We're able to write the HTML directly in the JavaScript file, for example. We tend to write our events just in the JavaScript as well. But it's really useful to just be aware of the document.addEventListener method as well, because as I said, it used to be that React didn't support all browser events, so you couldn't add every single event that you might need in your application inline, and you would have to do it this way instead. So I'm definitely going to show you this way as well. But in a React application, prefer the inline styles, and that's what we're going to jump over and do now.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, cheers, Cam. Right. So I don't know why I made this a JavaScript file. Really, I should have just made it a text file to avoid all the annoying highlighting. But never mind, done it now. Let's jump back over. So this first one, button 1, I want to use an inline event listener there. And this is what Cam was mentioning. So we can pick any event you want. If you want to have a look, see what events there are. Let's not do it in there. This won't list all of them, but I think it just gives some common events there. So these are resource or page events, right? The load, the unload. Network events if you're online or offline, so really good for the progressive web apps that some of you might try and incorporate into your team apps, I'm not sure. Focus events, right? So we use these on the platform. When you leave the page, your focus score goes down. So this is partly how we're going to be triggering that or monitoring that, just using focus and blur events. Focus means when you are actually focused on that element in the page, so for people who just navigate via keyboards as well, then that lets them know what element they've currently got selected. And likewise the blur is the opposite of that. And then some of the ones we might be using, more things like the mouse events, or even we can use a copy and a cut event, right? And that will just be triggered when I use a keyboard shortcut for copy or paste. And I think this is where we had the problem with the platform, the really hard to debug thing, right? It was a strange little CSS error that happened when we copied text from one part of the platform to another. It threw in an extra strange character in there for us. Mouse events, these are probably the most common ones, right? On click, we've all seen that before. On double click as well, right? That's an interesting one. So not very user friendly probably, because most people aren't used to seeing it, but it could be very useful in certain interactions or certain games, perhaps online games. Yeah, so wheel's only going to work if you've got a mouse wheel. I haven't got a mouse wheel, so I can't demonstrate that today, but you know that extra button in the middle, which is like a mouse scroll.
Yeah, I was thinking like a sort of
You're like a hamster in a wheel, and you've got this image in your head, right? No, we can't monitor those events when your hamster's getting some exercise next to you. Yeah, drag and drop event. So that was, I guess, a new addition in HTML5. I didn't mean to click on it. Sorry. But for any who saw the team app using the cards and they had the drag and drop elements inside of the card creator, then they used a few of these as well. I think media events for all the media. Look, there's lots, but you're not expected to remember them all. You just sort of look up a reference as and when you need them. Yeah, but that gives you an idea of some things that we can implement. So, what event shall we try and write inline? On mouse. Sorry, and I've written it wrong already. On mouse exit, you said, yeah?
Yeah.
Is that on mouse leave?
Oh yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I don't. I'm
Mouse
not.
leave.
I'm not aware of an exit one,
No,
but
no, mouse
definitely on mouse leave. Yeah, cool. So, in other words, when we hover the mouse over the button, nothing's going to happen. But then when our mouse moves outside of the button, then that should trigger some sort of event. So we just write the name of the event that we want to trigger inline, then we put the equals sign, and then we've got a couple of options. It depends how we're calling it, but it's going to be a bit of JavaScript, so it's a JavaScript function that we want to trigger. We could write it inline, but let's just say we want to trigger an external JavaScript function for now, somewhere else in our code. If we were passing this down as a prop and stuff, we might just write the name of the event, but it's a good practice, I think, to just write it as a callback function. And this will mean that the function doesn't get immediately invoked. It only gets invoked when the mouse event does actually occur. So let's just call this handle button 1 for now, yeah? Just so we know what event and what element is triggering it. And make sure you do invoke that function. So the problem is we can't write it like that, otherwise the event would be triggered straight away. And if we write it like that, well, how are we going to trigger that event later on? We'd have to immediately invoke the handle button function, which is a bit of a weird pattern, and not everyone understands that, I don't think. So it's best to write it as a callback function, and then we can control essentially when we want it to be invoked, and that will be when the event triggers. Okay, so that is just how you write an inline event handler. Got to just like move my mouse everywhere and then talk off the page and then talk. So the name of the event, on mouse leave, equals, open your curly braces, write a callback function that invokes your event handler. And then we can come up to another part of our function and we can write our event handler. For now, I just want to make you aware of the event object. So when almost any event gets triggered, a event object is created. So this E that I've got there stands for event. And if I want to use certain properties in that event, I need to pass the event object into my handle button 1 function. And that will give me access to various useful properties. So I just want to show you the difference now between a few of these properties. Let's do 3 separate console logs, I think. Oops, what happened there? So this is just so we can see what the event is on the console page. So the first one is going to be the event object is, and that is my E. The second one, I need to disable whatever it is that keeps doing that. Sorry guys, I'll look into that as soon as I get time. And E.target. So this is the element that triggered the event in most cases. And that's E.target. And I also put current target, yeah, so it could be different and you could reference the current target, but the one that I'm going to display for now is E.target.value. I think that's the one that you will see very commonly used, especially for inputs and forms, and we'll look at inputs and forms a little bit more this afternoon. I'm sure you'll be using them in your team app. All of these Dom selectors I'm just going to comment out for now so I don't get any errors down here, or if I do, I know that they're directly referencing something that is an error in my application. Okay, so now we have written our on mouse leave event to be triggered, and that will trigger the handle button 1 function and pass the event object to it. And then handle button 1 up here. So this is a function. Yeah, I know I've defined it as a variable, but it's an arrow function. Yeah, with the name handle button 1, and all that's going to do at the moment is log the values to the console, And let's make it do something more interactive. Do you want to change the background color or the color of the text? Just something that's easily visible. What would you like to do?
The background of input.
The background of the input. So
Yes, for
we haven't got an input yet though. We've only got a button. So what do you mean?
so the background of the button, sorry.
The background of the button. So change the background color of the button. Okay, yep. So we've got a couple of ways we could do that. For now, let's just use the Dom Selector. Yeah, this is the long way around of doing it, but we could select a certain button to change. And in this case, we want to select button 1, I assume, but it doesn't have to be, you see. Now, button 1 has got an ID of button 1. So how could I select that out of the DOM?
Get element by ID.
Yeah, so I could invoke document.getElement by ID, and I pass in the string button 1. This is a bit of a long way to do it, but it's just to get you used to the method. So document.getElement by ID button 1. Yeah, and then what do I want to change on that?
So if I use document.getElement by ID, then I don't have to use the hash.
No, because it's always searching for an ID, so definitely don't use the hashtag. Nope. So we could add a style to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Style.
Now,
Is it another curly another brackets, and then inside you have to do like
an object.
CSS object?
That's what I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
I think it's that, but also I'm just making this up.
So this is what you're suggesting, isn't it?
Right.
And then put the CSS inside there. Let's try it. Yeah, this is how we learn, right?
So,
And then we want to change the background or the background color.
Yeah. For red.
It can't probably do background minus color. It's probably going to want me to do it like that. And then the colon, and then the color we want to change it to is
Then
red. Okay, yep. All right. Does it need a semicolon inside? I'm thinking not, but no. All right, let's try this. So it should log some stuff to the console and then hopefully change the background color, but it might not. Let's go to our event listeners. So it's button 1. So when I move my mouse out, it should trigger something. Let's open the console. Oh, hold on, I might do it. No? You've looked up
I'm just looking it up.
the style for me. Is it just
It'll be like
dot
style dot
background color and then
equals
yeah.
random.
Yeah, so look, document.getElement by ID dot style blah 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 is not a function. So we almost tried to invoke a style function which doesn't make sense. So of course we should have done. So I'm just going to open the console. Lovely, lots of errors for you. It is triggering our console.logs. So the first one, the event object, we can see that it's given us an event object with lots of properties. Yeah, I don't know what half of these do, but the X and the Y coordinates are really useful if we're working with shapes and we need to move things around. And what am I looking for? The target, yeah, so that's one of the ones that we've referenced later on to see what the target value returns. Yeah, it's a bit weird the way the values don't display, but yeah, just notice that there are various properties attached to the event object that we can use. One of the most common ones is event.target, and look what that returns. That's actually given us the element straight away, just by typing event.target. So we didn't even need to do document.getElement by ID button 1, because we could have just done event.target. If the thing that is triggering the event is the same thing that you want to style, then just use e.target. If you want to trigger on one element but change a different element, then you're going to need to select it out of the DOM. Does that make sense, yeah?
Yeah. Are you going to show an example?
We can do it, yeah, we'll refactor the code once we get the style working, yeah? Cool, so, we don't do dot style and pass in that, although...
Yes.
All
You
that-
don't have to delete it.
What do you mean I don't have to delete it? Leave it there?
No, I mean before the background, just get rid of the. Oh.
Oh, it's back. Yep.
And then.
But are we going to need to do it like that?
I don't think so. That's not what HTML W3 school said. It just says
it's not well, it's equals. Isn't it equals?
it's dot the
Then take out the
style
take-
type, and then it equals what you actually want it to look like.
So it's style equals background color equals, and then yeah, red instead of.
Yeah, like that.
Style equals background color.
Well, maybe try to put that inside the bracket.
It's probably difficult to do.
What's your syntax that you've got there?
I'm looking at. I'll just zoom in. Can you see this?
Yeah. Dot style, dot color. Yeah. So
Maybe that's just colours, like one of the main ones. Maybe one.
dot background color, and then you've got an equals. What are we going with dot
Isn't it very
style
happy?
background color? Because it's JavaScript, and I think it's trying to. If we don't need background color, it's probably going to be that in React. Yeah, whereas in HTML we could get away with it. All right, let's see whether it's happy with that. It's button 1, wasn't it? We've done, yeah. So there's button 1, and then oh, look at that! Good work, team. So as soon as the mouse leaves, then it triggers the event, and look, it's triggering it every time, but we just can't see the color changing. But we can see that the console adds more stuff. Blink and you miss it. But it's just triggering all my console.logs again every time my mouse leaves that button.
So if you want it to go back to red, you're going to have to put another one inside that function, right?
If we want to go back to red,
Wait, no. I
Back to
mean
white.
back to white. Yeah.
when would you like it to go back to white?
I don't know what makes sense
When you go back to it.
when you go back.
So on mouse enter.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah?
When you exit again, so instead of just doing the red again, just do it back to white. and just-
Or like the second time you hover over it and then
and then
exit.
Next time, back to red and then back to white.
How would you create like a sort of continuous situation then? It should just be on mouse enter, it goes white.
Just do a counter equals 0, and then when you enter.
I mean, probably the easiest way if you want to sort of toggle a style is to use a toggle. Yeah? So you're going to be toggling a class name perhaps of red and white, yeah, on the event. So you'd have to write some logic, and you could query what the current style is. Yeah, so we could do.
Oh, you mean like with a ternary operator?
Yeah, with a ternary, we could say let current color equals document we've got in, yeah, right. So we don't have to write document.getElementById anymore. We know we can use e.target because we just want to style the current one. So we can use e.target .style.background color, and then we can say current color. Thanks for the on your spot examples, guys. We can say if the current color is equal to red, then white. Yeah, we're gonna have to change it. So if the current color is red, then change it to white.
But we have to write.
I know we have to write something here, but otherwise, go back to red. Yeah, or
Is this in React or is this regular JavaScript?
it's regular JavaScript, but it is a React application. So
Because if this is in React, then we have to use like a state that keeps changing rather than just color button and
not really. We're directly manipulating the DOM, so we don't have to store it in state. But it makes sense to store it in state. Yeah, but I don't really want to go there as well.
Okay.
So let's just keep it in vanilla. So let option equals is it gonna like that? Okay, and then we can say equals option. Yeah. So we've got the current color, and then we've defined what option we want to do for the new color, and said if it's red, make it white, and if it wasn't red, so if there's any other color, then change it into red. And then we actually change that by appending a style, and let's see if it works. I'm doubtful, but let's see, right? So it should go red still. It doesn't. Oh, it does. Sorry, yeah, it's on the leave. And then if I trigger it again, nice, yeah. And it's completely white rather than grey. I didn't realise that we had some sort of weird grey thing here. Well, that one's going red as well, but I think that's because of a different event. Oh, it's red text. Yeah. So now we got.
Okay. So now you have to do it if one of the buttons to something to end on the Dom element.
Say that again. Sorry.
So, sorry, I've sort of taken over this lesson.
You have a little bit. That's all right.
Because you said before you were going to show us an example. So instead of itself doing something, now it's like if you interact with one DOM item, something will happen to another DOM item.
Yeah. So you know what we had before when we did a get element by ID. We could have instead used a query selector. Yeah. So we can just say let L to change. So the element that we want to change equal. I'm going to use a query selector now. And let's go down and see what we want to change. Do we want to change button 3? Is that alright? Let's not give it button 3. Let's not give it an ID. Let's give it a class name for now, just to be something a little bit different. So we've got our class name equals button 3. We can select that using query selector, and we can put in what in here, guys? It's got a class name of button 3 dot for the class name, and button 3. Button 3. Okay, and now, well, do we just want to? Do we need this current color anymore? Okay, so we could do element to change dot style dot background color. Yeah. And this one here, we're not using e.target because it didn't invoke the event, but we have selected it and we've stored it in element to change. So we want to change the style of that. So I think now that should apply the same event, but to button 3. Even when we hover over button 1, button 3 changes.
Yeah.
Yeah?
So we can do it something
But cannot set property on click of null.
something like disco light.
What's happening there then? Oh, that's a different bit of code. So that must be a previous bit of code that I've written that was trying to query the ID of button 3. So let me just get rid of that for now. And a button 2. Yeah, okay, this is previous code, but it should still work. Okay, we're back in. Now when I hover over here, nope, didn't work. So because it hasn't currently got element to change should be an element, so it should have a style property. So at the moment it looks like our element to change is not returning what we want. So let's have a look and see what it is returning. Just get rid of these. Stick them down the bottom in case I ever want them later. Don't actually have to comment them out. I will. Current car equals console.org. Change. Okay. Let's see what element we're actually selecting there then. Null. So that means it can't find it, I guess. Did I definitely type everything right? So we've got dot button 3.
I don't know two class names.
What's that?
The two class names in HTML.
There are 2 class names in the HTML. Are there? Oh, ah.
Right, let's put them next to each other. Would that cause an error?
Yeah, maybe that only took the last one then. So maybe it overwrote button 3 and called it box instead. Good spot, Max. Thank you. Because I'm zooming about a bit, so you're obviously paying attention. Let's see if that's made any difference. Yeah, nice. So now it's actually selecting our button 3, so the rest of the code should work. That would have taken me a long time, Max. Thank you for finding that one. So now, when we hover over button 1 and we leave it, it should, button 3, go red. And it does, yeah? So your events don't have to be tied to the element. Hold on. So you can change any element in the page by hovering over a given element, yeah? Or by triggering an event on a given element. It doesn't have to be, because the event's on that element, it has to change that element.
So we can manipulate.
You can manipulate anything in your page
model, yes.
by just clicking a button anywhere else or hovering or yeah. So it's just an event. So it's just a trigger for any.
I'm wondering how to do this menu, like is for example in Facebook or in different mobile apps where you are pressing some button and is appear box. I believe this is div.
Yeah.
Hide somewhere by CSS style, yes?
Yeah, they're either creating an element from scratch. So, you know, we could trigger creating an element. We could do react create element, something like that. And we could create, I don't know, a header. We're in a button, aren't we?
Some container or no, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, we could even change the name of the button, or we could create a header and stick that inside using. Generally, you don't use it in HTML, but it would work. Yeah, we could stick some inner HTML inside of the page or inside of a hidden div.
Yeah, exactly. This doing the HTML.
Stuff like that. Stuff like that. Good. So let's get back on track. That was one way to trigger events. Any questions on the code that we've done first before I move on? Nope. Okay, so that was triggering an event using an inline style and using either getElementById or query selector or event.target to change just the color of an element. Doesn't have to be the color, of course. We could do anything we want. So we're just changing the style inline as well by adding the necessary property that we need. Let's do something a little bit different for button 2. So I don't want to add an inline event listener. So what I can do so what I can do is add an event listener to the whole document, and the event listeners only get added after the DOM content has been created. Because if we haven't yet created our buttons or our headers, then we can't add event listeners to them, right? So this is just checking that React has gone through this process first. It's created my divs, it's created my buttons. All that's been created. And then once that has happened, so once the DOM content has loaded, that's another event, right? DOM content loaded is the name of the event. Then that triggers a function. And in that function, we can add other event listeners. Yeah? And this is where we're definitely going to have to use the query selector or the get element by class name. So let's try a different one. Let's give this a name property, button 2. And we'll leave the class name for button 3. So how do I now query the DOM to get button 2, to get the button 2 element? What method could I use? Remember these ones?
Get element by name.
Yep, get elements, plural, by name. So I can do document dot get elements by name, and the name was just button 2. So oh no, I need to attach an event. Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, let's just see what that returns. So this should trigger as soon as the DOM content has loaded. So this should just be in my console straight away. And we'll see what get elements by name returns. Yep. Look, a node list. So I said it might return a HTML list, but I apologize, it returns a node list. And inside of that list, there's just one thing. And that is the button. Yeah, with all its attributes. You can see that it's got a name, it's got a class, all these sorts of things. If it had any children, we would have a HTML collection of its children. But it's just a button, so there's nothing inside there at the moment. However, there would be something inside if within the button we perhaps had a header element. A header element. Yeah? So now there should be a child in there, which is the H2 element. Yeah, it's definitely been updated because button 2 is now bold, like a header would be. And if we go in there, we look at the element, children now, there's the H2 element, you see? So you could easily again access child elements by first selecting the parent element from the DOM and then doing stuff to the child nodes. So there's loads of possibilities, right? As soon as you see the structure of the DOM and you know how to get elements out of it, then just get creative. So what did I want to show? So we've successfully selected that. If this one also had a name of button 2, how many elements would be in my HTML node list? 2 now, yeah? Because both buttons, button 2 and button 3, are inside of my node list. Remember I said it's very similar to an array. We couldn't call .map on it or anything like that because it's not an array, but we could easily convert it into a JavaScript array and then call map on it afterwards. Alright, I'm going to put it back so that we've only got one of them. So, can I just chain on add event listener like that? And let's say I want to chain on, I'm going to do it really simple for now, right? Just an on-click event. Right, we've had a mouse leave, let's do mouse enter instead. Sorry, I'm mixing up my mouse enter. And then this would be a function, and let's just call it for now handle button 2. And then in handle button 2, okay, let's change the text to blue. Yeah, that should work. Except here we're going to need to pass a callback if we want access to the event object. Okay, so my question is, will that work just chaining on add event listener to a node list? It shouldn't, yeah? Dot add event listener is not a function because we have not returned a single element. We have returned a node list. In fact, that's nicely broken for me. So we cannot do node list dot add event listener. Doesn't make sense, yeah? Could we do the first element in that node list, add event listener? I would think so, yeah, because a node list is a list of nodes or a list of elements in a HTML page. Now there's no errors. I've forgotten what the trigger was. It was on mouse enter, wasn't it? So when I enter it, the button should have blue text now. Nothing happened. Is that because I didn't need to pass a callback, or is that because on mouse enter, handle button to up here? So that should just do the e dot target. But let's see if I don't put it as a callback.
Is it because you put, you called that an event when you called that function? Is it within that function?
Say again.
On the document.add event listener line, this is all within that function body, right? But you passed it into that function as event. Maybe you have to write it as event. Does that make it clear?
I don't quite follow what you're suggesting, to be honest. Yeah, how to rephrase that? Let me just see if this works first.
Okay.
No.
Maybe.
Let's see whether this is getting triggered first. Because if that's not getting triggered, we know the problem's down here. If it is getting triggered, the problem is with the e.target. Yeah.
Because when you're calling the handle button to function,
Yep.
what are you passing into it?
Well, I was trying to pass
You were
the
passing
event
E,
object into it.
But you were passing E,
Yeah.
and you need to pass the word event.
No. You can call it whatever you want.
Is that not right?
You call it whatever you want.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. But isn't it within a function which has the word event as the target?
So the event listener on mouse enter. Is it on mouse enter? On mouse? Yeah. On mouse enter. Doesn't seem to be triggering. Wonder if it needs the word function. Ah,
Yeah.
add event listener is mouse enter, is it? Rather than on mouse enter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
does that mean like a capitalize when you add something? Is it all okay?
Nice, thank you. Sorry about that. Yep. So the conventions. Yeah, event listener. Because it is an event listener, you don't need the word on, right? On says this is an event, but you've already said we're adding an event listener, so we just need the name of the event minus the on. So this would be like mouse leave, not on mouse leave, yeah? Whereas inline events, we need to say this is an event property, on mouse leave. Yeah, camel cased for React. Yeah, there's lots of little things like that to remember, but I forget them as well. So have your documentation next to you as you're writing these events, I guess is the best way. Thank you, for pointing that out. So now it works, yeah? So when we're adding event listeners, just the name of the event minus the on, all lowercase, and then the function that we want to trigger afterwards, and that triggers it, yeah, as before. So button 2 goes blue. Yeah, and I get hello because I've still got my console.log there. Cool. There's one more way, but it's not used much, so I might just skip over that. It's a very old-fashioned way of doing it, and you'll never see it done. But you can directly add properties to an element. So if you manage to get an element, you don't have to add event listener. You could literally do... Now is it on mouse enter? Yeah, okay. You can literally do on mouse enter like that, and then set that equal to a function. But the problem with this is you can, I think, only have one event if you do it this way. So if you're trying to have multiple events, it's just going to overwrite the previous one. So yeah, you don't really use that. But if you ever see it in code, you know that's what it's doing. Yeah, they're just chaining on an event and triggering it that way. But you have your two decent ways of doing it in React. You have either add event listeners, or you have inline events, which under the hood are just adding event listeners for you. Yeah, so hopefully you'll agree that this syntax is a bit simpler, just doing it all inline there, rather than having to add event listeners when the page loads or something like that. Yeah, or another event can trigger adding an event listener and all this sort of stuff. But this is the way you often see just the base events added. Yeah, when the content is loaded, that adds all the necessary event listeners for that file. Last thing I wanted to show was, you might have realized we have an event, sorry, not an event, a link down here. So it's just a link to Google. And on clicking that link, I want it to invoke a function. Just a little bit of note about this code here. So some of you have asked, how do I open a new page when I click on a link? So target equals underscore blank will make sure that when they click on a link, it opens it in a new page. And in other words, if you're on your web page and you don't want to redirect people away from your web page, then you would open whatever they've clicked on in a new page so that your page is still there. Yeah, and that stops people navigating away from your site and then, oh, what was I on like 5 sites ago? I can't remember, because your tab will still be there open. However, there are a few little security risks with that, or little bugs were discovered, so therefore you now need to add that property, rel equals no referrer, no opener, and that will just essentially cover that security issue there. If you do it in React anyway and you're running your application, it will give you a warning saying you've used target equals underscore blank, but you haven't put rel equals no opener and no referrer there. Yeah, but just be aware that that's all it's doing, just covering a little security flaw. So what happens when I usually click on a link? It just goes to that page, right? Boom, there we go. Opening a new tab, Google. However, so that's default event behavior. That's a default event for an anchor link, for a link, yeah? For an A tag. However, let's say for some weird reason, you'd never do this with links, but when you click on something, you want to prevent the default behavior. Then there's a really useful property, and it is called event, so not event in this case because I've just used the word e, so e.prevent default, and that will prevent the default event that the browser has for that type of element, and then afterwards you can just write your custom code. So in this case, I just want to change the text to going nowhere rather than link to Google or whatever it said previously. So if I go back to my page, click on go to Google or not, now it doesn't go anywhere. The default event is not triggered because I used prevent default and it ran my custom code instead. Yeah? Just through that property. So make sure you put it at the top of the function, right? Otherwise, yeah, the stuff won't get run beforehand. Cool. Any questions? So add event listener, inline events. You've got options for your Dom selectors, but remember, if it's one of these elements with a plural or query selector all, it's not going to return an individual element, it will return a list of elements. So you will then need to either select what element you want by using an index, or map over it if you want every single button to have the same event, for example.
So it's array.
It's not an array, no. So if you wanted to convert it to an array, we could say const array LMs equals create a new array dot node list. Yeah? Now you've got an array of elements. So we have array elements. Then we could call dot map. Then we could pass in each element. That does element dot add event listener, blah 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 blah. Yeah? Get the idea? Nice. Any other questions? No? Alright. Thank you very much. We will use these selectors again this afternoon for forms.